If I could turn back time, I would change everything. This phrase echoes in my mind whenever I look back at those years I'd rather forget. But I can't escape what I've lived through, what has shaped me into who I am today. I grew up in a house where silence screamed louder than any argument. My parents, David and Sarah, lived like two strangers forced to share the same roof. I remember the nights when the sound of breaking dishes would wake me up, the muffled cries of my mother coming from the room next door. She was pregnant with me when the abuse began. I can only imagine what it must have been like to carry a child in her womb while being beaten by her own husband. David abandoned us when I was just 3 years old. He simply packed his bags one Thursday morning and walked out the door as if he were going to buy bread and never coming back. Sarah was devastated, but not for the reason a daughter would hope. She wasn't crying because she had lost her husband. She was crying because she was stuck with me, the living reminder of that failed relationship. I never felt like my mother loved me. This is a painful truth I've carried with me since I was little. After David left, Sarah sank into a deep depression. She looked at me as if I were to blame for all her problems, as if my existence were a mistake she couldn't correct. Often she would leave me at my Aunt Emma's house for days on end. "Take care of her for me," she would say, as if handing over an inconvenient package. Emma did what she could, but I felt like I was just another burden. I would come home hoping to find a hug, a smile, any sign that I was welcome. Instead, I found Sarah irritated, complaining about everything. The noise I made, the food I wasted, the air I breathed. The beatings were constant, for any reason, a low grade at school, a broken glass even when I cried too much. Sarah would hit me with a fury that seemed directed not just at me, but at all the frustration she carried. And the words hurt more than the slaps. She called me a disgrace, a mistake, the worst thing that ever happened in my life. I was 7 years old and already knew I wasn't wanted. It was one of those times when Sarah left me at the neighbor's house that my childhood died for good. Robert, the husband of the woman who was supposed to take care of me, took advantage of his wife being out to go shopping. I was only 8 years old and didn't really understand what was happening. I just knew it hurt and that I wanted my mother, even knowing she wouldn't come to save me. When I told Sarah what had happened, she slapped me across the face and said I was making up stories to get attention. "Always making a drama," were her words. At that moment, I understood that I was completely alone in the world. School became my refuge and my hell at the same time. It was the only place where I could escape from home, but also where my anger exploded. I started to misbehave, fights, classroom disruptions, disrespecting teachers. It was my way of screaming that I existed, that I needed attention, even if it was the wrong kind. Mrs. Johnson, my 4th grade teacher, called Sarah almost every day. "Your daughter is impossible," she would say. And each call meant more beatings at home, more screams, more rejection. It was a cycle I couldn't break. The more I misbehaved, the more Sarah hated me. The more she rejected me, the more I rebelled. At 11 years old, my life changed again when Sarah started dating James. He was 5 years younger than her, a handsome guy who worked in an auto repair shop. When I first saw him, I thought maybe things at home would improve. James seemed kind, different from the other men Sarah had brought home before. And things did change, but not in the way I expected. Sarah transformed with James. She smiled, cooked special dishes, got dressed up every morning before he woke up. It was as if a completely different person had taken my mother's place. The problem was that this new Sarah only existed for James. With me, she remained the same, cold, distant, irritated. Sometimes I would imagine what it would be like if she treated me with half the affection she showed James, if she made me a special snack, asked about my day at school, gave me a hug before bed. But that was just fantasy. I continued to be invisible, an obstacle between her and her happiness. James, on the other hand, was kind to me. When Sarah mistreated me in front of him, I saw discomfort in his eyes. He never said anything directly, but small gestures showed that he felt sorry for my situation. Sometimes he brought me chocolate when he came home from work, helped me with my homework, let me choose the TV channel. This kindness was something completely new to me. For the first time in my life, an adult treated me with affection. I began to look forward to the moments when James came home from work, when he asked about my day or told me funny stories from the shop. It was pathetic how I clung to these crumbs of attention, but it was all I had. At school, things also changed. I was 13 years old when I met Lisa, Jessica, and Amanda, a group of girls who seemed to have everything I wanted: popularity, confidence, freedom. They did everything their parents forbade and seemed not to care about the consequences. I desperately wanted to be part of that world. It was with them that I had my first experience with alcohol, hidden in the school bathroom. It was with them that I started skipping classes, making elaborate excuses for the teachers. It was exciting to be part of something, even if it was wrong. For the first time, I felt included, but this group had its own cruel rules. They made sure to make it clear who was on top and who was at the bottom of the hierarchy. I was always at the bottom. They laughed at my old clothes, my lack of money for expensive snacks, the way I spoke. Still, I endured it all because being humiliated by them was better than being completely alone. It was Jessica who suggested that I needed to grow up, to really be part of the group. All of them had already had boyfriends, had kissed, had done things I didn't even know about. At 14, I felt behind, childish, excluded from an adult world that seemed fascinating and scary at the same time. The pressure was constant. They talked about boys, about dates, about experiences I didn't have. I lied, made up stories about kisses I had never given, about caresses I had never received. But they saw through my lies, and that only made my situation in the group worse. One day, Lisa introduced me to Kevin, a boy 2 years older who went to another school. "He likes you," she said, winking. "It's your chance to finally become a woman." The way she said it made it seem like my virginity was a disease that needed to be cured urgently. I met Kevin at a party at a friend of Lisa's house. He was handsome, older, and for the first time, a boy was really interested in me. It wasn't love. I knew that even at 14. It was just physical attraction, teenage curiosity, maybe even pity. But for me, it was attention, and I was starving for any kind of attention. It wasn't romantic or special like I had imagined my first time would be. It was awkward, quick, and a little painful. But when it was over, I felt different. Not better, not happier, just different. As if I had crossed an invisible line that separated me from childhood. Lisa and the others were euphoric when I told them. Finally, I had a real story to share, an experience that put me on the same level as them. For a few weeks, I felt truly accepted, but soon I discovered that being part of that group meant constantly proving my worth. It was during this time that I made my biggest mistake of trust. Amanda seemed closer to me than the others. She sought me out to talk, gave me advice, seemed genuinely interested in my life. In a moment of weakness, I told her about my childhood, about Sarah, about Robert, about all the pain I carried. Amanda listened attentively, asked the right questions, hugged me when I cried. I thought I had finally found a true friend, someone who understood me. What an idiot I was! A week later, the whole school knew my story. Amanda had told Lisa, who told Jessica, who spread it to half the world. Suddenly, I was no longer the rebellious girl in the group. I was the pitiful girl, the victim, the one with the messed up life. People looked at me with pity or disgust, whispered when I walked down the hallways. What hurt the most wasn't the exposure, but the betrayal. I had opened my heart to someone for the first time in my life, and she used my pain as gossip. I learned that day that I couldn't trust anyone, that my secrets were weapons people could use against me. At home, things were changing too. I was 15 years old and my body was developing. Sarah noticed and didn't like it. "You think you're something, huh?" she would say when she saw me getting ready to go out. Thinking you're pretty now, as if being attractive were another way to betray her. But James noticed too, and that was different. I began to notice how he looked at me when I walked through the room in my nightgown, how his eyes lingered a little longer when I bent down to pick something up. At first I thought I was imagining things. Then I began to enjoy the attention. It was wrong and I knew it. But James was the only adult who had treated me with kindness, the only one who seemed to value me. When Sarah was at work and we were alone at home, I started dressing more provocatively, creating situations for us to be close. I remember the exact day everything changed. It was a Saturday afternoon. Sarah had gone to work an extra shift at the hospital where she was a nurse. James was watching TV in the living room, off from work, because he had hurt his back. I came downstairs from my room wearing a very short shorts and a low-cut blouse. "Are you okay?" I asked, sitting on the sofa next to him. My voice came out softer than usual. James looked at me differently, as if he was seeing a woman, not a teenager. "I'm better now," he replied, and his hand touched my leg. I should have stopped there, should have gone back to my room and pretended nothing had happened. But I was 15 years old, starving for affection, and James represented everything I had never had: care, attention, desire. When he kissed me, I didn't resist. We went to his and Sarah's bedroom, the room where she slept every night. It was intense, urgent, full of a passion I didn't know existed. James treated me like a woman, made me feel desired, important. For an hour I forgot all the pain, all the rejection I had suffered. When it was over, reality hit me like a punch in the stomach. I had betrayed my mother in the worst possible way. Not that she deserved my loyalty after everything she had done to me, but still, it was wrong. What started as a moment of weakness turned into a secret relationship that lasted almost 2 years. Whenever Sarah went to work, whenever we had the house to ourselves, James and I would meet. It was our secret, our conspiracy against the world. I convinced myself it was love, that James truly loved me, that we were soulmates trapped in an impossible situation. He told me I was special, that I was different from Sarah, that with me he felt alive. They were the words I had always wanted to hear, coming from the only man who had ever treated me well. But deep down, I knew it was more complicated than that. James took advantage of my neediness, my hunger for affection. I was a hurt teenager looking for love anywhere, and he was an adult man who let himself be carried away by the situation. I won't say he forced me, I wanted to be there, but I also can't deny that there was a huge imbalance between us. Sarah never suspected. Or if she did, she never said anything. She was so focused on her own happiness with James that she didn't pay attention to what was happening around her. She continued to treat me badly, ignore me, as if I were an inconvenient piece of furniture in her house. At 17, I began to feel afraid. Afraid that someone would find out, afraid that Sarah would know, afraid of the consequences. James was also more tense, more cautious. "Maybe we should stop," he said one day after we had been together. "This is getting dangerous." I didn't want to stop. James was my only source of affection, my only refuge, but he was right. We were taking too many risks. We decided to reduce the frequency, be more careful. Eventually, we stopped completely. It was around this time that my relationship with Sarah exploded for good. She had found out that I had skipped school and confronted me when she came home from work. The argument started small but escalated quickly. She called me a slut, useless, said I was just like my father, irresponsible and without character. Something inside me snapped at that moment. At 18 years old, I was no longer the scared child who took beatings silently. I fought back, screamed back, said all the truths I had kept inside for years. I called Sarah a horrible mother, a bitter woman, said she had never loved me and that I hated her too. The fight turned physical. Sarah hit me, and for the first time in my life, I hit back. We rolled on the kitchen floor like two crazy women, scratching, pulling hair, screaming obscenities. It was pathetic and liberating at the same time. After that day, we couldn't live in the same house anymore. Sarah made it clear that I wasn't welcome, and I couldn't stand being near her anymore. I went to live with my aunt Emma, who took me in without asking too many questions. Emma was tough but fair. She set clear rules. I would help with household chores, look for a job, behave like an adult. In return, I would have a roof over my head and food. It wasn't affection, but it was respect, and that was more than I was used to. I got my first job at a clothing store in the mall. The pay was low, but it gave me independence. For the first time, I had my own money, could make my own decisions. It was scary and exciting. It was at work that I met Marcus, a 23-year-old guy who worked at the store next door. He was kind, funny, treated me well. We started dating and soon were living together in a small apartment in the city centre. Marcus didn't know anything about my past. To him, I was just a 19-year-old girl trying to build her life. He loved me in a simple, honest way without complications. It was everything I thought I wanted, but I still carried many open wounds. I had anger outbursts out of nowhere and moments of deep sadness that I couldn't explain. Marcus tried to help me, but how could he understand something I myself didn't comprehend? At 20, I found out I was pregnant. The news hit me like a tsunami. I wasn't ready to be a mother, could barely take care of myself. My first reaction was total panic. How could I raise a child when my own childhood had been a disaster? Marcus was happy about the pregnancy, but I saw fear in his eyes too. We were two young people trying to survive, and now we would have a child to take care of. Emma was the one who convinced me not to do anything stupid. "This child can be your chance to do things differently," she said, "to give the love you never received." When Sophie was born, everything changed. I looked at that little face and felt something I had never felt before: unconditional, instant, overwhelming love. I swore I would be for her the mother I never had, that she would never feel rejected or unloved. But being a single mother, Marcus and I broke up when Sophie was one, wasn't easy. I worked all day and took care of her at night. Emma helped when she could, but I constantly felt exhausted, always running against time. It was during a particularly difficult phase, when Sophie was 2 years old, and I was desperate for money, that I made a decision I'm not proud of. I met an older man, William, who offered to help me financially in exchange for companionship. It wasn't exactly prostitution, but it wasn't love either. It was survival. For a few months, I met William once or twice a week. He gave me enough money to pay the rent, buy diapers and food for Sophie. I convinced myself I was doing what was necessary for my daughter, that any sacrifice was worth it for her. But the situation was consuming me from the inside. I felt dirty, wrong, repeating patterns I had sworn I would never repeat. One night, watching Sophie sleep in her crib, I realized I needed to stop. She deserved a mother who respected herself, who fought for a better life in a dignified way. I broke up with William and focused on finding a better job. I got a position as a receptionist at a medical clinic. The salary was low but honest. I moved back in with Emma temporarily until I could get my finances in order. Today, at 24 years old, I can say that my life is finally on track. Sophie is 4 years old and is a happy, affectionate, full of life child. She will never know what it's like to feel rejected by her mother. Every day, I hug her, tell her I love her, show interest in the drawings she makes, the stories she invents. I still live with Emma, but I'm saving up to have my own place. I plan to take a technical course, maybe in nursing or administration. I want to give Sophie a better life. I want her to have opportunities I never had. Sarah never contacted me again, and I didn't look for her either. James and she are still together, as far as I know. Sometimes I wonder if he thinks about what happened between us, if he feels guilt or remorse. But these are questions I prefer not to answer. My past has shaped me, but it doesn't define me. The wrong choices I made, the pain I carried, the traumas I faced, all of this is part of my story. But what matters now is the present. the woman I have become, the mother I have chosen to be. Sophie is my redemption, my second chance to do everything right. When she calls me mum with that sweet voice, when she hugs me before sleeping, when she smiles at me in the morning, I know that everything I went through was worth it. She is proof that it's possible to break cycles, that it's possible to choose love even when you grew up in its absence. I still have a lot to learn, a lot to grow. But for the first time in my life, I have hope, I have plans, dreams, a reason to fight. And most importantly, I have Sophie, and she has a mother who loves her unconditionally. That to me is everything.